Hello and welcome to the 23rd episode of When Life Hands You Lemons. Now, I'm very excited for this episode because Anthony is incredibly inspiring to me. He has a very unique upbringing as he started from nothing, about knowing nothing about production or music theory. And when he was at his old job, any downtime he had, he would go to YouTube and watch everything. He talks about how he kind of struggled searching for some of the things he wanted to learn. Like, for example, you can't really look something up if you don't know what it's called. How are you supposed to learn it if you don't really know what it's called? So you kind of have to watch video after video until somebody talks about it or does it and then puts a name to that technique or whatever it may be. So we talk a lot about his story and kind of how it was interesting to kind of come up and learn production from nothing, and how he was making beats for his friend, and how he would tough it out in basically this big kind of garage, and he would live in there and work until 3 a.m. and they would just write music. And then lastly, when he was graduating from school, he tells us that he was somewhat homeless for 5 months prior to his graduation, and he still graduated from school. And he tells us how that portion and that kind of rock bottom in his life turned him around and allowed him to be where he's at now. So he's very inspiring to me, and this conversation is one of my favorites because we really kind of geek out about production and mixing and mastering and compression. So if you're kind of into all those nerdy techniques and learning a little bit about how both Anthony and I kind of work when we're writing and mixing music, this is the perfect episode for you. And even if you need a little motivation to kind of give yourself that bump that you can do it, you are worthy of success and achieving your dreams, then this is definitely the episode for you. So I don't want to tell much more about Anthony or the show. I want to let Anthony kind of tell his story, as I like to let the guests do. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with the amazing and incredibly talented and inspirational Anthony Morrissey, otherwise known as Count Morris. Sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Mr. Anthony.
My name is AJ. I go by Count Morris. That's like my production name. Honestly, obviously I'm a music producer, audio engineer, so I'm kind of on the audio side of things. I really consider myself a late bloomer when it comes to music. Sometimes I feel like I kind of don't belong in the industry because of my background. I grew up playing sports basically my whole life. Didn't really do anything musically. I wasn't in a band. I didn't really play instruments. I played like the trumpet in 7th grade and 8th grade. That was about it. So other than that, I just grew up playing sports just all my life. And it wasn't until I was in high school, at the very end, basically my senior year, and one of my best friends, KG, he introduced me to like music programs like FL Studio and Reason. So I slowly started getting into that. I just downloaded like the demo version of FL Studio. And I kind of just went from there. I really loved what I was doing. I had no idea what I was doing. Like I literally knew nothing about music. I didn't know where the note C was, which is like the most rudimentary note on the keyboard. I didn't know anything about chords or scales. I literally didn't even know anything about tempo. When I made beats back in the day, the tempo or the BPM on my beats would be like 300 because I thought that was like normal. Turns out that's not really normal.
No, not at all.
No. So yeah, it was a really deep learning curve for me because, without the background to help me, have a foundation, I had to like literally learn everything from scratch. And I really liked the challenge of that. So as I kept getting into it, I'm just YouTubing literally everything. I'm Googling questions for literally everything, like how to keep your kick drums and 808s from overlapping when you're playing different notes, and the tempo ranges between different genres, and how to work my DAW and all of that. So just a lot of research. It was even to the point where I was working my jobs. Like I was a manager at Peach Wave, an assistant manager, which is like a yogurt shop. And any kind of downtime I had, I would literally be on my phone on YouTube looking up videos and taking notes of like filters, like, oh, what is a low pass filter and what is a high pass filter? And I remember it vividly. I even still to this day have the notes that I made when I was at work during those times. I still have them in a box somewhere. So yeah, I mean, just really the big thing was just trying to get into it and take it one step at a time, one day at a time, learn one thing at a time. And it eventually got me to a spot where I'm actually pretty decent at making beats. I was making them for my friend KG, the one who introduced me to the music software and the music side of things. And by the way, his dad was actually a really big DJ here in Connecticut, which is where I'm from. So I kind of was spoiled on that end a little bit because they ended up introducing me to a lot of people and brought me to studios. I even had the opportunity to go to Jim Jones's studio. Jim Jones is a rapper. He's a little bit older now, but he had a couple of hit songs back in the day when we were like in middle school. So that was really cool. I got to meet Jim Jones thanks to my friend KG and his dad, and a lot of other people as well. So back to what I was saying. I was making a lot of my beats for KG because he was also a rapper, which is kind of how this whole relationship started. So it started with him as basically my main client, my only client. I was making beats for him. Then eventually it sprouted out to me kind of learning the engineering side of things. So I was actually then recording him, doing his recording sessions. And I had to learn again from scratch, like, everything. I didn't know anything about mics. I didn't know anything about pickup patterns or recording techniques. And then eventually that sprung out to me mixing and mastering his music. And it just kept snowballing to the point where I was literally like, the behind the scenes guy. I was doing everything for my friend as far as the behind the scenes work goes, everything except for songwriting, that is. So honestly, I have to give a lot of my credit to my friends and my peers from high school, which helped me really kind of get grounded and really helped me start my career here. And it's just crazy to think about. I'm sitting here, thinking about these memories I had with my friends at that point. We literally, my friend Kev, it's kind of a weird relationship, but I dated his stepsister at the time. And it kind of ended badly, the relationship between me and his stepsister. So his stepmom didn't like me too much. So basically we had to move our studio into his garage, and like we would be there until 3 o'clock in the morning in the middle of winter. And it's like just so cold in there because we didn't have heat. And in the summertime, it was super hot. And I just remember grinding it out in that garage. And then eventually we decided to move into a factory. And we basically took this factory and turned it into like a makeshift studio. It was super ghetto, but like it felt like the coolest thing in the world to us that we had our own studio, our own spot that we were renting. We were literally living in there as well because there was a bathroom with a shower and everything. So it was just really cool thinking about, how far I've come. I still have a long way to go, I feel like. But when you just sit back for a minute and think about, where you started, especially for me, someone who didn't grow up in music at all, didn't know anything about audio engineering and kind of the background I've been able to build off of what I started from the end of high school.
Cool. That's a lot of information. And I think a lot of people kind of had that very similar aspect. We've all got to start somewhere. And I'm in a similar shoes as you, as I just kind of picked up and I watched YouTube video after YouTube video after YouTube video, and I learned the basics. And then I went to school to kind of further those concepts. So how difficult for you was it to kind of learn those things and apply it? Like you were watching these YouTube videos at work and you're like, even now I'm at work and I'm watching these YouTube videos on how to do this. I'm like, oh shit, I wish I had something I could try this on, but I don't. And you're kind of like, how hard was it to learn that stuff in the YouTube videos and then kind of apply it and actually get a result from it?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. It really depended on the content or what I was trying to learn. But some of them were like, if the thing that was really difficult when you're first starting something is knowing how to ask or how to research something. Like I said earlier, I had to learn how to how to keep my 808s and kicks from overlapping when I played them, separate notes. When I was trying to research how to do that, I didn't know how to even type that into Google because I didn't know what the whole concept of overlapping 808s is. I don't even remember what I was trying to search, like what I was typing into Google when I'm searching it. it took me a while to actually figure out the answer. I think I just stumbled on a YouTube video one day, and the person that was watching just happened to mention how to like go about fixing that problem. But yeah, I would say the hardest thing is actually knowing what to research and how to type it. But as far as applying it, a lot of it really depends, especially with the audio engineering side of things, because it's very technical, it's very like scientific, it's all numbers and frequencies and whatnot. So that stuff can tend to be a little more confusing, but I feel like once you start getting your feet wet, it kind of snowballs and it kind of gets a little bit easier. Because you'll learn one concept from something, and then you try to learn something else, and some of the concepts and techniques that you learn from the first thing kind of carry over to the second thing. So definitely the beginning is hard, but it kind of gets easier in a way. It gets harder but easier, if you know what I mean. But yeah, I would say the audio engineering side was a little more tough for me. But with that said, I feel like that actually my lack of a music background actually helped me with my audio engineering. Because back when I first started making music, obviously I didn't know anything about music theory. I didn't know chords. I didn't know notes. I didn't know scales, anything like that. So what I would do was instead of trying to build these, amazing melodies and chords, I learned a lot of like technical techniques like sound design and using sound effects like chorus and flanger to kind of make your sounds bigger and better. So instead of, making better melodies, because I didn't really know how to, I at least knew how to, use a chorus and a reverb to make my sound better. So my lack of music knowledge and lack of music theory actually helped me with my audio engineering skills, as weird as that sounds. But now, obviously I went to Full Sail for music production. So I took what I already knew about the audio engineering side of things, and I went to Full Sail to actually learn the music theory, which was super important for me.
Mm-hmm. And I played piano prior to going to school, and so I had a pretty solid understanding of music theory, but I think that my music theory knowledge to this day somewhat ruins when I'm writing music, because I'm overcomplicating things. I'm like, oh, that's actually not in key, so I can't do that. But it's like whatever sounds good, like that sounds good. And I can go on a walk now and I'd be like, oh, those frogs chirping, that's actually a tritone. And like, who cares, but I can pick those things out. So
definitely
for somebody like you who comes from nothing, who came from not knowing anything about music, what advice would you give to somebody who is trying to learn this stuff? What are some things you would say, hey, you should learn this, this, and that, and then build from that going into this?
Okay, yeah, good question. I would say, that's a tough question. I would say the very first thing you should try to learn, if you're brand new, is I would probably say learn your DAW first, because those are your tools. That's your hammer and your nails and whatnot. So if you don't even know how to use your tools, how are you going to build anything? So I would say at least try to learn your DAW first, whether it's FL Studio, if it's Pro Tools or Logic Pro X. It doesn't really matter what you use. It's whatever you like. Personally, I use FL Studio for making beats. I use Pro Tools for mixing and recording. But yeah, I would definitely say learn your DAW first. And then second, I would probably say it depends on what you're trying to do, but if you're trying to be a music producer, I would definitely say learn music theory next. I kind of took the opposite approach. Like I said before, I kind of learned the audio engineering side first because that's just what I had available. But I would say definitely pick up a music theory book or on YouTube. There's actually a lot of really good YouTube channels that can help you with music theory. And at least learn the basics, like your scales, your basic scales and your basic chords and chord progressions and whatnot. Then once you start learning, getting a grasp of your music theory, then you can kind of branch out into the audio engineering side of things and mixing and mastering. But I mean, whatever works for you, works for you. That's just how I would probably recommend. If I can go back and kind of redo my foundation and kind of learn again, I would probably do it that way. But that's just me.
Yeah, I can definitely agree to that, because when I first started, I knew the music theory part. When I first started getting into like writing electronic music and kind of writing music in the computer, that was kind of the new thing to me, was I had to learn the DAW. I knew all the music theory. I knew how to build a chord. I knew how to do a chord progression. I knew how to write a melody. I just didn't know how to use FL Studio. I didn't know how to use Logic. I didn't know how to do any of this stuff. So once I got into that and started learning it, it made a lot more sense and kind of everything kind of flowed.
Definitely.
I didn't have to, work on learning
and what's funny? I met a lot of people like you at Full Sail who It's funny because it was almost like opposites. Like I was the opposite of a lot of people that went to Full Sail that already had the music production knowledge, but I noticed that a lot of them didn't know anything about DAWs because they came from like classical backgrounds. They were playing in bands or whatever the case might be. So they really lacked on the DAW side of things or the audio engineering. And I remember being in the music production courses. People would always tell me like, damn, how are you so good at audio engineering? And then I would tell them like, that's, how I started. And I would be like, how are you so good at music production? Like, how do you know your theory is so good? And because they started, with the classical background. So yeah, definitely I would agree to that.
Yeah, and even when you learn the music theory portion, you can kind of apply that to engineering because certain frequencies equal certain notes.
Absolutely.
So for example, fun fact, here in the United States, when you plug something in and your microwave is humming or your toaster's got a little bit of a hum to it, that hum is at 60 hertz. Why? Because the current coming from that is 60 hertz. In the UK, it would be a little bit different, or in Europe, it would be a little bit different. It would be 50 hertz. So that 60 hertz frequency is actually a B4 on the piano. So that weird knowledge kind of comes in to factor. So you can kind of factor that into when you're actually writing music to when you're engineering it. So
absolutely. They say a good mix starts with the arrangement and the production, which is true. I mean, I can say that I could attest to that because I actually do more audio engineering stuff now. Now that I'm graduated, I do a lot more audio engineering work, and I can tell you from the work that I've gotten, my best mixes and my best mastering projects have been from songs that were already produced and arranged beautifully. And when that happens, it's honestly makes my job way easier because there's less work that I have to do. So yeah, you're absolutely right. The production and your music theory background is actually going to play a huge role in your audio engineering skills.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're writing the music, you have the different frequencies. Like for example, you might have a kick drum. Well, when you hear that one kick sample, or even the acoustic kick that you've recorded in, you don't really hear a pitch to it, but there is a pitch to it. That fundamental frequency is a frequency that's a pitch. So do you pitch your percussion and things like that to kind of fit the key?
I was literally just thinking that. I was literally just about to say that before you even asked it. I do. It depends on the track. And you're going to hear me say that a lot throughout the interview. It depends on the track because music is like that. Everything just depends on what you're working with. But I do usually, if I'm making like the typical trap hip hop music, I normally will pitch my drums. If I'm making more of like a boom bap kind of hip hop, like old school, I think my drums are usually not pitched. I keep them just the same frequency. EDM is the same way. I'll pitch it, but it just depends. But yeah, in general, I do pitch my drums to the key of the song.
That's something I need to get a little bit better at. I just it's a kick sample. I just throw it in there, and
it's not a huge deal, honestly. Like there's no right or wrong. I've had songs where I thought when I pitched the drums it sounded better, but then when I unpitched them and just kept them flat at the same frequency, it sounded better. So it really just depends.
Yeah. So when you're receiving a mix from a client or a friend or whoever, what are some things that you like to see before you start mixing? Or what are some things you're like, oh, thank God that they did this, or thank God they did that?
If they actually know what stem files are or track out files, that's a beautiful start. Because I get a lot of artists who don't even know what track out files are or stem files. And for those of you who are listening that don't know what track out file is, it's just the individual files to your song. So, for example, it's the individual track out to like the piano, and then the individual track to the lead vocals and the background vocals and etc. So there's a lot of people that don't even know what track out files are. And then you have to like give them this really long explanation on what it is and how to get them. Actually, it's gotten to the point where I actually made PDF files for every DAW system and step-by-step instructions on how to get stem files because I got tired of saying it to people. So if they already know what stem files are, that's a great start. If they send me the files and they're actually named correctly already, that's a beautiful start because that's that eliminates maybe 30 minutes to an hour of my job already just doing that. If their gain structuring or their gain staging is good, if all their tracks or the gain staging is, lines up, you don't want one track that's super loud and the other that's, super quiet and you have to bring that track up and then you got all this background noise. So that's always a good sign. And also just their communication in general. I find that communication is really the biggest thing. I have a lot of clients that I met from like Facebook and just, referrals in general. Those type of clients that I get are usually the best because they already are kind of into the industry and they kind of already know what they're doing. I'm on Fiverr.com and other freelance websites. Those can be a little bit tricky because you get people from all over the world, all age groups that, some people are really experienced, some aren't experienced at all, don't know what they're doing. So you kind of have to kind of coach people sometimes, which I have no problem doing, especially if it's a client that I'm going to be working with for a while. But those are definitely all good signs. I would say communication is probably the best, though. If you just get someone that just says, hey, I want this song mixed, here's the files, and then, you ask them, qualifying questions like, what kind of mix are you looking for? Do you have a reference track? Do you have this, that, and the third? And they don't really respond, then that's usually a bad sign.
Yeah, I think communication is key in anything, because if you don't know how to communicate and you don't know how to tell me what you want, then you're leaving it up to me for interpretation to kind of figure it out. And I don't want to have to sit here and send it 3, 4, 5 times for you to tell me like, oh, I don't really like this. Well, if you would have been upfront with me 6 emails ago, we could have had this done by now.
Man, I've had to go through that quite a few times with people. They don't tell you, or they don't send you a reference track, and then when you send them the product, they're like, no, I want it to sound like this. So then you're going back and revising the 10 hours of work that you just did. So yeah, that's always the worst. But that's why I try to communicate first, ask all the questions I can first. I try to even actually do Skype calls or just a regular phone call with the client if I can. It's kind of difficult on sites like Fiverr because they don't let you exchange communicate or phone numbers or anything. But yeah. Which I guess maybe I can actually talk a little bit about the Fiverr thing and freelance websites in general. I can kind of have some stories.
Absolutely, please
with scams and stuff. So you got to be really careful. Like as far as the business side of things, I have an example with Fiverr in general. I've done really well on Fiverr, or pretty well. I don't want to say very well, but I've done pretty well on Fiverr. I've only been on it for about 1.5 years. And I made a pretty decent chunk of change. It's like a good little side job for me. But I've been on it for a while, and at some point, it was like last summer, I found a client that I've already worked with a couple times. She'd sent me a couple of songs, just singles that I mixed and mastered for her. And everything was good and gravy. And then she decided to, like a couple months after I did her first couple songs, she decided she wanted to get her whole album done with me. So I was like, awesome. That's a great deal. I get to work on a whole album. I'll get a nice chunk of change from that. It's a repeat customer. That's great. So we worked out the deal. She ended up paying me. I gave her actually a pretty low number of like $800 for the whole thing. It was like 12 songs. It sounds like a lot of money, but for what my rate is, it was actually a little bit cheaper. So I did it. It took me like 3 weeks. We agreed upon the terms and everything and about how long it would take me. It took me about 3.5 weeks, whatever. Sent her everything. And she was like, I love it. Everything is great. I did a couple of revisions and whatnot, but everything was pretty good overall. So she approved the order. Now, the way Fiverr works is, the customer makes the order. You get the order. You have a certain deadline to finish that order. And then you submit it and whatever. And then the artist has to approve. There's like an approve button. So once the artist approves it, then you actually get your payment and all of that. Everything's good and gravy. So she approved it. She gave me a 5-star review. She, just said really good things about the mixes in general. And then, 2 months go by, 3 months go by, and everything is good and gravy until I wake up one day and I see that there's a notification from PayPal saying that they withdrew $800 from my account. So I was like, whoa, what the hell is going on? And it was like the worst time. Like I had so many bills I had to pay that month. It was like literally the worst timing possible. So I'm like, okay, what is this even for? Why are they taking $800 out of my account? So I look into it, and sure enough, I find out it was the lady that I did the album for. She apparently went to PayPal and made a dispute claim saying that she made up a lie and basically said that I didn't send her the files or something like that, which was a complete lie. So she ended up getting her money back from PayPal. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It was Fiverr that took the money from my account. Sorry, not PayPal. So PayPal gave her a refund. Fiverr took $800 from my Fiverr account, which put me into the negatives. So what I had to do was basically fight Fiverr and tell them like, hey, I have proof that she liked the product. She approved of it. She gave me a 5-star review. I have messages going back and forth from me and her. And they were just like, yeah, no, sorry. Once it gets disputed, there's nothing we can do about it. You're just going to have to, take the loss on that one. That's basically what they said. So yeah, that was basically it. I lost $800. I had to literally do free work on Fiverr to get back to the $0 balance. It was terrible. I was actually complaining on Facebook. I was really close to quitting Fiverr, and just deleting my whole account. I ended up not doing it because I was just, obviously I was emotional at that point, but it was terrible, man. Losing $800 like that, knowing that you did a good job, knowing that you got scammed because somebody just, she just wanted to get her money back for whatever reason. So, yeah, just a little lesson there, just a little life story. There's a lot of stuff like that in the industry. Obviously, it's a little bit different on Fiverr because the way the Fiverr system works, it's very easy to scam. I've had some other issues like that on Fiverr. Not as big, not as big as $800, but a couple of small ones too. But if you're just, in general, if you're doing a sale, you're working out a sale, you should usually get a down deposit from the artist first. And that's something I do when I'm working with people like that I meet from Facebook or just referrals in general. I usually will ask for a down deposit, whether it's 50% or 25%. I normally do that so that I at least get something. I don't get scammed. But as far as the whole PayPal dispute and the online disputes, it's unfortunately part of the problem. It's just part of it. And you just have to hope that you get good clients and hope that stuff like that doesn't happen. Obviously, you want to keep evidence. Like I still have my messages and all that, but sometimes, things just don't go your way. So.
Yeah, that really sucks because and those moments always come at the worst possible.
Literally the worst time. Like I can't even explain how bad it was.
So let's go back a little bit. You do a lot of freelance work. So do you do a lot more mixing projects? Do you do a lot more mastering? Do you do them both at the same time? Kind of what's the balance there?
Yeah, definitely. At this point, most of my freelance work is audio engineering. So specifically mixing and mastering. I just bundle mastering in with my mixing services. I basically include it for free because mastering to me is really, the easy part. It's very crucial, don't get me wrong. It's a very important part of the process, but for me, it's like the easiest. The mixing is really where the heavy labor is. So yeah, I do a lot of the mixing and mastering is probably the number one thing I do. And then I sell beats on the side, like hip hop beats and rap beats. I'm also trying to get more into like the sound design. So making patches for, VST libraries, making, drum kits and whatnot. And hopefully eventually working my way to video games. I have actually had the opportunity to do a couple of video games. I did a couple of student projects where I was the sound designer and the music composer for a couple of student projects. And then that led me to actually doing a real game. For a company that has their game hosted on miniclip.com. It's called Street Jam. It's a basketball game. And I had the pleasure of doing the sound effects and the music for that, which was awesome. So definitely going back to the question. Sorry, I ran a lot. I do mostly mixing and mastering now. I sell beats on the side as well. And then also some audio post-production. So I've actually done the commercial for a car company out in Germany. I did all of like the audio restoration, cleaning the background noise and mixing and mastering the audio for them. And that was a lot of fun. Other than that, it's kind of a mixed bag of things that I do. Like I even offer video editing services, and I've made some videos for people. That's not what I went to school for. I don't really know a whole lot about video editing, but I think just staying versatile is important. It's also good to, just learn another skill because it goes hand in hand with the music. Other than that, though, I do work a full-time job. It's just a sales job for Sprint. So I do that from 9 to 5, and then from 5 to 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, I'm doing my freelance thing. I'm kind of at the point where I've been freelancing for like 2 years now. And I'm kind of looking for more of a job with like an actual studio or a post-production company or something. So that's something I just recently started kind of getting on the ball. Freelancing is great, something I plan to do the rest of my life, at least until I retire. But it's like running a business. So it's a lot of work. It requires you to learn a lot of skills, not just music. It requires you to learn marketing. It requires you to learn, sales tactics. It requires you to do, advertising and brand development and all of that, which I love doing. Don't get me wrong. But you still, when you're a college graduate, you need something, a stable paycheck of some sort. And freelancing is definitely not always stable. I've had some really great months where I've made more money than I would have made at a regular job. And I've had some months where I make, almost nothing, and you got to have something to kind of balance it out. So that's kind of where I am at this point. Now, I have worked internships right after graduation. I worked an internship in the city called Pullman Sound, which is an audio post-production studio. And this is actually basically another lesson I can give to you guys is be careful with the internships. Some of them are great. Some of them are not so great. The one I went to, as much as I loved going to the city every day, as much as I loved the studio that I was interning for, I honestly didn't learn much of anything. I was basically just a runner. So I spent a lot of money. I was working for free, and I was spending a lot of money traveling every day to the city, basically just to say that I had an internship. So I did that for about 2 months. Honestly, didn't learn that much from it. So I decided, you know what, instead of doing the internship thing, I got student loans and all that. Let me just pick up a full-time job, just whatever it can be. It just happened to be sales with Sprint. And then I'll still do my freelance thing because I've already built a foundation for my freelance website and everything that I can still make money from that while I get at least a stable paycheck from Sprint or whatever the case my next job might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's we all have to do that, and there's no issues there because we all have bills to pay. There's things to do, but it's that side hustle that keeps us going and reminds us that this is our passion. Because if we didn't have that passion, we wouldn't be doing it, and we'd just be doing our 9-to-5 job, coming home and watching TV, watching a movie, doing whatever. And I want to go back to your point and kind of start our next topic of discussion, which is kind of diving a little bit more into mixing and mastering. And I'm sure that you can reiterate this 100,000 times over, that a bad mix will not be fixed in mastering. No.
Never. It never will.
And can you explain that, why, and maybe give an example?
Yeah. I mean, you can't like try to polish a potato and turn it into like, a golden statue. You just really can't. I mean, I've had mixes, or I've had people send me mixes that they want me to just do the mastering for. And if those mixes are just filled with frequency content and there's like, instruments just overlapping other instruments, there's really nothing that I can do to kind of fix that. I can make the song sound a little bit louder. I can make it sound a little more brighter. I can give it a little more bass. I can, maybe carve out some of the low mids to make it sound not as muddy. But at the end of the day, it's just going to be a little bit more polished potato is all it's going to be. There are other methods you can use when you're mastering, like stem mastering, where basically instead of sending the individual stem files like we talked about earlier, you're sending like groups of files. So like all of the drums together on one track and then all of the guitars on another track. And you can master that way. But honestly, if it's at that point, that already tells you that it's a bad mix. If someone's asking you to do a stem master, that already tells you it's a bad mix, because the only reason why they would be wanting to do that is because it wasn't mixed properly in the first place. It's just not good, honestly. Because at the end of the product, all you're getting is a louder, slightly more pretty potato. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But there are definitely ways to fix that. I mean, the first thing to do, if I'm in that situation, and this is what I did, if I'm working on the mastering or if I'm just listening to it, and I realized that there's nothing I can do to make it sound like super professional, then I'm just going to tell the artist, like, hey, this needs to be remixed, or at least think about remixing this, because no matter what I'm going to do, it's not going to sound like that Drake song that you wanted me to, reference.
No, and I think even, with a lot of people, I think a lot of artists think that a song needs to be very, very busy. And that's something that I've even come to terms with. Like some of my songs that I've done, I'm like, I'm doing way too much. I'm overproducing it. I'm adding way too much stuff. And then you have too many cymbals, or you have too many hi-hats, you have too many percussion instruments, and they're just fighting with each other. Yeah. And it's almost impossible to, when you have like 60 different percussive sounds, like you're not going to be able to fit all those in a mix.
They say
that's impossible.
The average person can only hear about 6 to 9 different sounds at a time, and actually be able to like distinguish the 7 to 9 different sounds. So I always try to keep that in mind when I'm producing. I try to keep it to like 7 to 9 elements max. Now you can double up and harmonize. So I can take like a violin track and stack it with 5 other violins. At the end of the day, that's still just one sound. but I try to keep it to like 7 to 9 different elements. Or there's other tricks, like you can have, 10 elements in one part of the song and then bring on 10 different elements on a different part of the song, or like the breakdown or something. That way you still get like, 20 different instruments, but you're just spacing them out. They're not all on top of each other,
Right. And that's kind of what I've come to terms with. I just finished up a song and I keep going back to it, but I think the thing is I have too much stuff going on, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to leave this song as it is. I'm going to turn it into a lesson learned, and the next song or next songs that I write, I'm going to keep them more minimalistic. And when I'm listening to the radio, or I'm listening to songs that I listen to on my iPod or my iPhone, I'm thinking this song doesn't have that much going on to it. You have the kick and the bass, and you have maybe the vocal, you have the synth.
It just has. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You just have some additive things that are kind of pairing with the lead synth or the vocal, but other than that, everything else is kind of tucked back, so it's just basically supporting everything. And it's impossible for sometimes. It's hard.
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree. Some of my favorite songs right now are the ones that are like the least busy. I'm really kind of getting more into R&B right now. I just like the dynamics of the R&B music that's coming out from people like her, Daniel Caesar, Khalid, people like that. They're the songs, the productions are, I don't want to say they're empty, but they're not completely full. And they know how to bring in new instruments at the right times. But it comes down to great musicianship, great arrangement, great mixing, and of course, like a great recording to start off with. There was a book we read actually in Full Sail, and I still have that book. It basically tells you all of the elements to a hit song. I think there was like 9. But basically, it said like great musicianship, a great arrangement, great lyrics, great recording, and all of that. That's really what makes a hit song, not how many instruments are in it. Man, I can't even tell you some of the overproduced beats I made back in the day. I mean, I had this one beat I made a couple of years ago that had literally over 100 tracks.
Oh my gosh.
It was, and mixing it was a nightmare. It took me forever.
Yeah.
I try not to do stuff like that anymore.
No, I just don't have the time anymore. And not only that, I've learned better. Yeah. And when you add so many different things, and even when you look at a Drake song, like I'm not a big fan of Drake, my brother is, but I've listened to a couple of his tracks. His tracks are so minimal. There's nothing to them. But then when you listen to the mix, that mix and the master is so clean.
Crisp.
It's crisp, it's clear, the bass is pounding, but at the same time, the vocals are prominent. And a lot of times, like Drake, he doesn't even add like reverb to the vocal, so it's just a completely dry vocal.
Sometimes, yeah, you're right. Sometimes he does have very dry vocals. Sometimes it's the opposite, but yeah, you're right.
Right. And even in some pop songs, you listen to the pop songs, like the guitars and the synths and everything, they got everything going on, like reverb and delays and all this stuff. But when you come down to the vocal, they just have the dry vocal. And I'm like, how?
Want to know what my assumption or my guess, I've realized from mixing, I guess it's kind of a pro for being a beat maker and a mixer. It seems like it has to be one or the other that's busy. It's either the beat, the production is going to be busy, or the vocals are going to be busy. So if you have a beat that doesn't have a lot going on, it's somewhat empty sounding, that means you have a lot more room for those vocals to add more space, to add more harmonies, to add more reverbs. But on the flip side, if the beat is really busy, there's a ton of instruments, there's a lot of effects like reverbs, that's usually when you want more of a drier vocal sound. Especially if you have someone like Drake, who's actually a pretty good singer. When you have a good singer, you can have a dry vocal and it still sounds good.
Mm-hmm. And you want to make sure that the lyrics are coming through, because Drake does have a lot of meaning behind his lyrics as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's important with any genre. The lyrics are always, vocals are always going to be the most important thing. So I think that's a
unless it's EDM.
Unless it's EDM, then the kick and bass is the most important thing. So when you're mixing a track, what are some things that you're kind of looking out for? What are some things that when you're noticing, you're fixing them, or all that stuff?
Definitely. Usually the first thing I do when I'm doing my initial listen through is just hearing the gain staging. I want to make sure that there's nothing clipping. There's nothing that's too quiet that I have to bring up. That's really a big one. I get a lot of, beginner artists who don't really know the recording techniques. They're just recording themselves, and there'll be pops and glitches, or there'll be, clipping in certain spots, and I have to kind of tell them about it. I have tools, I have audio restoration tools like Isotope RX7 that will help eliminate that, but you never want to resort to that. It should always the recording should always be pristine. That should always be like the number one thing. The second thing I'll look for is like out of tune tracks, mostly on the vocals. I listen and hear if I hear any parts that are out of tune, I'll bring it into Melodyne. I'll just manually pitch correct it. If it's more of a hip hop song and they're going for more like the T-Pain effect, I'll just throw an auto tune on there. But that's probably the second thing. The third thing, I'm kind of just listening to the whole arrangement and production. I think the arrangement is a big part of music that it's kind of an underlooked part. People, they don't really take the arrangement into consideration, like, the format of a song. And I used to make songs that had like weird bar structures that are like 7-bar verses because I didn't know what I was doing. And there's some people out there that don't know, like, a normal song format, like they'll, put 15-bar verses or something crazy. So I'll look out for the arrangement as well and see if there's anything I can move around or take out. And honestly, I do that a lot. I actually take instruments out, or I'll take certain elements out if I feel like the song doesn't need it. And then after that, at that point, I kind of go into my regular mixing routine of, labeling, coloring the tracks, and then actually start the process of mixing.
Okay. And then what about, like, say for example, you're going and you've done with the mix. Let's go into the master a little bit. Yeah.
Basically, when I'm done with the mix, before I even send it out or try to start mastering, I usually send it out to the artist so I can get their opinion on the mix, because there's no point in mastering the song if the artist didn't even like the mix in the first place. So I definitely send it to the artist first and let them know, hey, this is not the master version. Let me just know what you think of the mix. If there's anything you want me to fix up or work on before I start mastering it. So I do that first. But when I actually bring it into the mastering stage, I just bring the whole 2-track song into a brand new session, and then start working on it from there with a fresh perspective. And I will never master the same day I mix. I think that's a terrible thing to do. Realistically, they say the person that mixes it is not even really supposed to be the one that masters it. You should really get a second person to do the mastering, which is kind of the smarter thing to do. But when you're a freelancer and you're trying to make as much money as you can, you'll do everything yourself. And then at that point, I'm just kind of doing my regular mastering routine and figuring out what plugins I need, what I think the song needs in general.
I was just gonna ask that. Like, do you mix and master the same day, or do you give your ears a break?
No, so the way I work actually is, it might sound weird to some people, but I actually like to work on multiple songs at a time. So, tomorrow I'll wake up and pick the 2 songs I want to work on. And they can be 2 songs from the same artist. It can be 2 songs from completely different artists. I actually prefer if it's from 2 completely different artists. So I'll pick my 2 songs. I'll load the first one up. I'll start my mixing process. I'll work on it for like 4 or 5 hours, or whenever I feel like I need to take a break. I'll take a 30-minute break, hour break, whatever. And then I come back and I start the new song. I start the second song. I load up the session and start working on the second song. That way, my ears don't just listen to the same thing all day long, the same frequencies all day long. My ears are at least getting exposed to other frequencies and a different song in general. So I'll do that, and then I'll work on the second song for 4 hours or until I get tired, take a break, and then go back to the first song. And I'll continue working on the first song, and then I just keep doing that until eventually both songs are done. And then once I'm done mixing both songs, I'll take the rest of the day off, or I'll even take 2 days off until I start mastering the songs. That way I have a better, kind of refresh my ears, and I have an unbiased opinion about the song at that point.
Okay. So when you're mixing, what are some of the things that you do for various instruments? Is there something you kind of do, like subtractive EQ, additive EQ, compression?
Oh, yeah. I have like a whole system I do when I'm mixing. It starts with everything we talked about before. So like listening to the song and labeling and all of that. But then I go through, once I start mixing, I do my gain staging, make sure everything's level. And then I do cleaning, basically. I'll pitch correct anything I need to pitch correct. I will use isotope if there's any background noise that needs to get rid of, or anything like that, clipping, yada, yada, yada. And then I start doing my subtractive EQ. That's usually the very first thing I do when I'm actually in my Pro Tools session ready to start mixing, is my subtractive EQ. Go through all the tracks, figure out what frequencies need to be cut out from those tracks. My go-to EQ for the subtractive EQing is FabFilter Pro Q2. Soon to be Pro Q3 because it just came out and I need to buy it. I can't wait. Subtractive EQ, that's really like in my opinion, one of the most crucial parts of the mix. Getting rid of those bad frequencies is honestly like the biggest part. And then once I'm done doing the subtractive EQ, I will then compress if I feel that the instruments need compression. And then after that, then I'll do, what do they call it? Additive EQ. So I'm actually boosting the frequencies that I like, which is typically like a kick drum. I'll boost, some of the low end, 100 hertz or whatever the fundamental frequency is on that kick. Just stuff like that, just boosting some of the polish areas. And then at that point, once I'm done kind of EQing and compressing everything, I kind of start doing sub routing. Actually, the sub routing is already done at that point, but I'll start, actually putting effects on the sub routes. And then at that point, it's just like effects, like, if I feel like I need to put a reverb on or chorus and whatnot. And then after that stage, just automation. And I go through like stages. I have a system of stages that I go through essentially.
Okay, so
that's basically kind of it.
Okay, so do you do EQ first and then compression? I know that's kind of a big debate in the production.
Yeah, I usually subtract EQ and then compress. There might be occasions where I'll compress first. Also, de-essing, I usually put de-esser after my EQ, but before my compressor. But again, it all depends on the track. That's also a big debate is when you put the de-esser on. Some people say first, some people say last. For me, it's usually after the subtractive EQ.
And again, it comes back to our discussion earlier is like there's no rule to it. You do whatever sounds good, and it doesn't matter. Like there's no set golden rule. Like if in order for this to be on the Billboard charts, it has to be de-essed before or after. Like there's no rule for it. You just do whatever sounds good and whatever works good for the track.
Yeah, there's like guidelines, especially with music theory. Like there's certain guidelines, and it actually goes back to what you were saying about when you actually learn music theory, kind of messed you up because you're just constantly trying to be perfect and make sure you're inside the guidelines. And that was also my problem towards the end of Full Sail. I was getting to the point where I was so like bogged with music theory knowledge that I felt like I couldn't make anything production wise because I was just like so overwhelmed that I didn't really know what to do at that point. So I totally I agree with you on that one.
Mm-hmm. And so when you're working on these different mixes, you're EQing the kick, you're EQing the snare, whatever, the vocals, you're finding the frequencies that you do and don't like. What are some of the things? Do you cut like 2 decibels? Do you cut 3 decibels? Does it really depend? Is there...
If it's like a really bad track, like if it's a recording that was like has a lot of, schmutz going on, I might have to do a lot of subtractive EQ down to like 6 decibels or more. But normally it's typically between like 1 to 3 decibels for both addition and subtraction. So, but again, it all depends.
Yeah, I think it's important to note too that you don't want to overdo anything when you're mixing.
No.
When you're mixing and you're kind of going into those final stages of the track, I think subtlety is key. I'm watching so many YouTubers going into these tutorials and they're explaining and they're like, oh, I'm EQing, I'm cutting this out, and they're cutting like 10 decibels. I'm like,
huge amounts.
Oh, well, what are you doing? Why are you telling people to do this? Because then they're going to get in their tracks are going to be so thin. Right. It's like, I don't understand.
I used to do that too. And also, I mean, that's a good point. The rules, the guidelines change from mixing and mastering too. Like for mastering, I would never do like a 3 decibel dip. Like that's way too much. Yeah. If you're doing anything more than like 1 or 1.5, that means you did something wrong with the mix. For mastering, like you make very subtle changes. And going back to your comment about subtlety, I feel like when you're mixing and production too, when you're actually making music, it's like painting a picture. Like an artist, like a painter, doesn't just take his bucket of paint and just throw it onto the canvas and call it art. He takes a paintbrush and he makes small little strokes, thousands of small little strokes, and those little strokes add to the big picture. And it's the same thing with mixing and music production. Those tiny little changes in EQ, when you do that to 20 different tracks, now all of a sudden your song, the entire canvas, actually is a lot different. You made a big difference from those subtle changes.
Mm-hmm. I think we all need to go into a perspective of mixing and mastering like Bob Ross goes into his paintings.
I literally do. Like I swear to God, I use that analogy, the one I just used about the painter. I use that all the time for people because I feel like you can actually visually see that, yeah, that's actually, you're right. The small things you do add to the big picture of everything.
Right, and sometimes like I watch some of his videos and I go like, what is he doing? Like, he's got blue there and he's got yellow up in the corner and he's doing this.
Yeah,
It's
and you have no idea
what the hell
until it's done.
And then once he's done these small brown brush strokes and then he's adding some white. I'm like, why is he adding white on a white canvas? But at the end of the picture, it's like, holy crap, that's a beautiful mountain scene. You know,
I do that with people like beat makers on YouTube. Like sometimes I'll be listening to their, they'll have a video of like how to make this type of beat or whatever. And you're into the video and you're like, what the hell is he doing? Like, what is he making? Because he's just making these like little chord progressions and it doesn't sound like much. And then all of a sudden it all starts kind of coming together and you're like, wow, he just made that song from doing those little simple chord progressions or whatever. I wasn't expecting that.
Right.
So, yeah.
And I've been watching a lot of those too, like how to sound like this or how to make a future bass or how to make a hip hop. And I'm thinking like, I need to go into production a little bit differently. Like I need to start with a simple chord progression and playing it out and then build upon that because my brain, I'm thinking about 600 different things at once. I'm thinking about the mix. I'm thinking my brain is all over the place. And I'm just like, I need to be like these people. I need to not have any knowledge on mixing. I need to not have any knowledge on music theory and just go by what sounds good.
Definitely. That's my problem right now when it comes to production and always has been. I've gotten a lot better over with that. Just the whole overproducing thing and just kind of my problem is sometimes I want to be the lead guitarist when I really just need to be the triangle player. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like I'll start making a melody and I really just need something just like a one line simple whole note. But then I'm like trying to play this huge guitar riff and it just, I end up doing too much sometimes.
Right. And then you're like, oh, I really like this guitar riff, but we already have that violin or that other guitar playing the melody. Like we don't need another one counter melodying and we're just going to confuse everybody. So let's think of your favorite mix or the best mix you've ever done. And let's move into the mastering. What did you do to that master and why?
As far as like what plugins I used or like just what I did in general?
Plugins, let's say compression. Here's why you did that compression. Like I did maybe 2 decibels of reduction. I did limiting and just kind of talk about that project.
Okay. Yeah. This is a client I have. His name is Ron Harper. I did a project for him. It was like in the summer or fall last year. And the mix or the production and everything was already really tight to begin with. Like the vocals, the recording, it all sounded amazing. So the mixing job was super easy. So with that said, going into mastering, that was also easy. I didn't really have to do much. I remember, I don't have the session in front of me right now because I have it on my archive hard drive. But from what I remember, I used, I always start off my mastering. I always start off with the FabFilter Pro Q. Just to do a little more subtractive EQ for the entire song as a whole. I think in that particular case, I really only subtracted some of the low mids, like around 500, just to get rid of some of that boxiness. And I did like a slight boost in the high end, at like 7K up, and then some of the bass there. And then the second thing I'll have is another EQ, an additive one, and that one was just polishing a little bit of the high end again. I think for the second EQ and that particular track, I used the API 2500B. It's a really good EQ for additive, in my opinion. It adds a lot of like airiness. It's just got this circuitry that sounds really good to me. And then what do I use after that? A little bit of a master compressor. I usually put a couple compressors on the master track, but I do them in layers. So like the first one is more of a slow attack and a slow release, and I'm just barely hitting the limiter on that one. And then after that, I use Isotope Ozone. It's just some of the tools in there, like the stereo imaging. I used a compressor from there. I used the dynamic EQ. And I think I might have used a multiband compressor. I don't remember on the top of my head, but I think so. And then once I use Ozone, at that point, the mastering is basically done. I might add a couple of other elements if I feel like the song needs it. I think I might have added Vitamin from Waves just to add a little more high end. But at that point, after that, it's just a master limiter. And I normally will use either Pro L2 from FabFilter or I'll use the L2 or the L3 from Waves. Those are definitely my go-to bundles, by the way. FabFilter I use in every single mix and every single master. It's my go-to EQ. They have really good reverb and compressor and other stuff. And then Waves, I use a lot of stuff from Waves, as well as like Slate Digital. And I don't know, I have a ton of stuff, honestly. But those are like my main 3.
Yeah, that's kind of my go-to is the FabFilter stuff. I have the Pro Q2, I have the limiter, I have the multiband compressor, I have the compressor, and then I have the gate. Oh, I have a de-esser as well. I think I said compressor twice. But I have 5 of their plugins. I got them on a student discount, and then I got them on a discounted rate as well, so it was pretty good. But now I want to get the new limiter and the new. I think they came out with the new limiter, didn't they?
Yeah, they have a
L3.
L2. Oh, there's an L3. No, I think they just have the Pro Q3, which is the new EQ. I think it's still just L2 right now.
Okay.
So I still need to get Pro Q3, but from what I'm seeing, it's amazing. Like it has a built-in multi-band compressor or like a dynamic EQ and a bunch of other stuff. I can't wait to get it.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it, and I mean, I just wish I had the money to splurge on it.
They're so expensive sometimes.
They are, especially if you can buy them in bundles that you can get cheaper, or usually like around the holidays they have really good discounts, and I try to snag them then. But there's quite a few other things. Have you ever heard of the Valhalla stuff?
Oh, yep, I have some of them. I probably have more plugins than I even need. I have stuff that I've never even opened yet, honestly. I have plugins that I've never even opened. I have so many.
I know. It's just like there's so many plugins out there and VSTs that you can get for free and even pay that it's just like there's like how do you know what to use and what not to? Like I've purchased plugins. I have free ones that I've downloaded, like free limiters. And usually the free stuff isn't that great because it's not updated in 3 years. So it's probably not even, would probably crash Logic or FL Studio now.
There's some really good stuff. I use another go-to that I use in basically every mix is the saturation knob from Softtube. That one is still free, I believe. And it's an amazing saturation plugin. It sounds so good. I use it on a lot of tracks. I actually use it for mastering. That's another thing I forgot, actually. I did use the saturation knob on the Ron Harper song. I used that for basically every master. It just adds a really nice warm color to your song.
Okay, and it's called the saturation knob?
Yeah, it should still be free. It's from Softtube.
From Softtube. I'm going to write that down just so I can check it out, because I know I've heard of it.
This is how I get most of my plugins, or how I learn about them. It's just from other engineers and producers or people I see on YouTube. I'll always look up a plugin before I buy it, or in most cases, I don't even know about a plugin until I've heard it from someone else.
Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of information about the production side, and it's great because I wanted to talk about that. I tried to talk about it in another episode with another guest, but we went on too many other tangents and got talking about other things. So thanks for all that information, and thanks for the stories about freelancing, because I think we all need to hear those, especially a lot of audio engineers are kind of freelance now. So we always got to be watching our butts. And
basically that's every studio. I mean, I'm in a really bad state for what I'm doing. I live in Connecticut right now, which is where I was born and raised. And there's like the industry is like there's no industry here. So for me personally, that's why I'm trying to move to the city, so I can get to actually recording people again, which I really miss. But that's actually another venue though for people. That's really just what everyone's doing. They're just opening their home studios and doing all the recordings at home. That's what I was doing when I lived in Orlando. I mean, I invested like $3,000 of my money while I was in college, and bought my first microphone, an AKG C414, and my Shure SM7B, which is what I'm using right now for this podcast, and my interface and all that stuff. And then within my first month after investing all that, I ended up getting like 30 sessions that first month. So it was, I don't know, it's just what everyone's doing right now. And I've actually called like every studio around me, but literally everyone's doing the same thing as me. They just say, hey man, like this is just a one-man show. I'm just a freelancer, just like you, yada, yada, yada. So that's pretty much how the industry is going at this point.
Yeah, I mean, that's because, not a lot of people have the money and time to kind of go into a studio that's cost millions of dollars. Nobody can afford those rates, $500-$600 an hour. Like
unless you're already an established artist, but
right.
Most people aren't. So that's why they come to the home studios to kind of get their start.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and even those artists that are like bigger, they're not even paying for it. It's the labels that are paying for it out of their pocket, and they just have to recoup it.
Right. But there's actually still some big artists that are still recording with like home studio engineers. Some people just like that sound more. They're more comfortable going to a home studio. I mean, I kind of enjoy the vibes more. It just all depends, I guess.
Yeah, it does. So I think we all needed to hear that. So it was great to hear those freelancing stories, because there's always horror stories. And for the most part, it's always a good experience. But there's always those bad ones.
Yeah, a couple of bad ones, yeah.
That's going to happen. Cracks, and you just turn them into learning experiences. So speaking of learning experiences, let's kind of transition into kind of moving into like when you're finishing up school. I know you had put in your form here that you kind of struggled through college, and then when you got the end of it, you kind of struggled even more. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how it's gotten to where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny how life is. One event can kind of snowball into where I am now. So I went to Full Sail. I'm definitely not coming from a rich family. I don't come from like a poor family, but I definitely don't come from a rich family. So, already getting to school and finding the funds for it was already a struggle in itself. Luckily, I was able to get a scholarship from the school and a couple other scholarships. So with those, I was actually able to get in and into the door. But definitely from day one, it was kind of a struggle financially speaking, as far as like the day-to-day living expenses. It wasn't too bad at first because I did take out like a little bit of a loan that would help me with the living expenses for at least the first year. But then after like the first year, it started getting a little bit tough because anyone who knows Full Sail knows that it's a full-time school, and they mean full-time. You're in class for at least 40 hours a week, and then you still have another like 20 hours of homework on top of that per week. So the best you can really do as far as a job is just a part-time job. You can maybe like 10 to 20 hours a week. And I was, I had one little part-time job when I was down there, and the freelance thing, but it's just really not enough to sustain you and your living expenses. So fast forward, what is it about? It was about 6 months before graduation. I got into a little incident. I had made a Facebook post, and it was just a very generic Facebook post, basically me giving advice to artists on how to record doubles, because there's a lot of artists that don't really know the principles of recording doubles and harmonies and stuff. So I just gave out like a Facebook post, just kind of giving advice. And this guy that we went to school with, he was my neighbor. I don't want to get too much into details, but he was my neighbor. He saw the Facebook post and I guess he just took it the wrong way. Maybe he thought I was talking about him or something. I don't really know what was going through his mind, but he took it the wrong way and left me like this really long comment on Facebook and swearing at me and this, that, and the third. And I'm the type of person where I don't like drama, so I'm not going to sit there and create it on my Facebook. So I just ignored the comment and I deleted it. Didn't think anything of it. And then the very next day, I was walking to my car, and because he's my neighbor, I mean, he was walking home from school at the same time, and he saw me and he like screamed my name, and he came running up to me and was yelling in my face and this time the third, talking about the Facebook post. And then the next thing I know, he puts his hands around my neck. So I'm like, okay, well, obviously I'm gonna defend myself because I'm not gonna just let him sit there and choke me out. So I did what I had to do and defended myself. But unfortunately, the people that worked at the apartment complex that we lived at, they eventually came outside after we started fighting, and they broke us up and whatever. There was nobody else outside that day. There was nobody watching us. There was no cameras in the apartment complex or anything like that. So there was no witnesses. There was no evidence to what happened. So when they came outside, they saw me and they saw the other kid, and they saw that the other kid was all bloodied up because, I obviously had to defend myself and I looked fine. So they, assumed that I was like the bully. So the cops come and it's just this big thing, and they're just treating me like a complete criminal, not even letting me tell my side of the story. And yeah, it was just a mess. Basically, I got blamed for everything and was looked at like a criminal. And the worst part is, like, when they asked, okay, so, how did this all start? And I told them, oh, this started from a Facebook post and this, that, and the third. And they're like, okay, can I see it? And I was like, well, I can't show you because I deleted his comment. So that was just like another thing that just kind of snowballed it. And yeah, it didn't end well for me. So I didn't get arrested or anything, but I woke up 2 days later with an eviction notice on my door saying that I had to move out within a week. So yeah, that was really awesome, waking up to that. And mind you, this is like 5 months before graduation. Mind you, I'm at a school where I can only work a very small part-time job. So I have literally like no money. I have like $100 to my name, maybe, if that. I probably didn't even have that much, honestly. So I'm like, great. I don't know what to do because a lot of my friends have already graduated at this point, or they're like graduating that month. So it's not like I can just call up one of my friends and be like, hey, man, can I like crash at your place for a little while? Because they were basically all gone. I didn't have money to just move into a new apartment because that requires like, a first month deposit and, security and this, that, and the third. So I didn't have that kind of money. So, what I did have was my car. So basically I had to live in my car at that point. and I lived in my car. I took all my stuff, everything that was in my apartment. I just went and got a storage locker for like 20 or 30 bucks a month and just put everything that I didn't need in there. I kept all my, essentials, like my, hygiene essentials and all that, and my laptop and the things that I needed for a day-to-day basis. Kept that in my car. But yeah, I basically had to live in my car at the school campus for 5 months. Did that every day. It was just a really bad feeling knowing that, the guy put his hands around my neck, assaulted me, and then, I defended myself, and then I somehow get kicked out and have to live in my car for 5 months. It was just a really bad feeling, and there was other things that happened, like the guy that I got into the scuffle with, he saw me living in my car in the parking lot at one point and taunted me and this, that, and the third, just really petty stuff like that. So it was really, really frustrating. I was losing my mind at that point, because between being homeless, between literally eating one meal a day, sometimes if I was lucky, 2 meals a day, getting very little sleep, I was just exhausted. I can't even tell you, man. I called my dad. I was like screaming and yelling after this incident happened. I was so pissed off, man. I just wanted to I don't know. It was not good. But with that said, I think becoming homeless was like one of the greatest things that ever happened to me, because it showed me so many things. For one, it showed me like the real side of life. It shows me how quickly you can become homeless. It shows me that not every person that you see that is homeless is a bum. Even though I didn't have a house, I was technically homeless. I didn't feel that I was a bum, obviously, because I was, at school and still working and doing what I could. But it really showed me a lot of things, man. It showed me how unfair life can be sometimes. But some good things that come out of that. I ended up finding a church down the road from the school that I would go to basically on a daily basis, because they had food, like snack packs, they call them. They would give out to homeless people. So I would go there, every once in a while when I needed food really badly. And then to give back, I would just go volunteer there to give back, some of the time, because I kind of felt pretty bad just going there to get food. To be honest, it was a pretty low point for me, but that was just some of the things I had to do. I had to, go to the church to get some food. I had to live in my car. Basically what I did when I wasn't in class was just hang out at the school library or the campus all day long and just try to be on Fiverr, try to be on Facebook, try to get as many sales as I possibly could and keep myself busy while I was in that time of need. But yeah, it was crazy, man. I learned a lot from that. Definitely learned more about budgeting and life itself. And that was a pretty crazy moment, but I got through it. And I think it made me stronger for sure. I mean, not that many people can say that they, were still able to graduate from college, even though they were homeless for like the last 6 months of it, So definitely it was bad, but it was good at the same time.
Right.
But it definitely snowballed. Honestly, it put me into the position I'm at right now. It's the reason why I'm back home in Connecticut and not still in Florida. It's just kind of crazy, man. It's just crazy how life works like that,
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all kind of need those moments where we need kind of a slap in the face, but at the same time, you get those slaps in the face when they're least expecting. So you just kind of have to make them what they are and turn them into situations that are as best you can. So thank you for sharing that story. I know you didn't have to go into that much detail, so thank you for sharing that. It's very, very inspiring to hear that, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners will appreciate it as well.
Definitely. And I know there's other homeless students, because, when I was homeless, I met like at least 10 other kids that were homeless too. And it was actually eye-opening, because before I was homeless, I didn't know how many homeless kids there were at Full Sail. And not just Full Sail, but in life in general. In Florida, there is so many homeless people. And honestly, it made me realize that not every homeless person is a bum or is a drug addict or whatever. I ended up meeting people, because I was homeless, I ended up meeting people that I would have never met. Like I met other homeless people from the church that I actually had like real conversations with and kind of really got to know them and figured out why they were in their position. Like I met one guy he was only homeless because his girlfriend basically, or his wife, divorced him and took everything, and things like that. You realize that there's a lot to life. So yeah, it was definitely eye-opening.
There really is, and that's one thing that kind of pisses me off in today's society is we look at homeless people as burdens, but I can guarantee that a lot of the people that say that they're more of a burden have never lived in their shoes, nor would they ever be able to comprehend what they've gone through. So I always take that outlook of, why don't we just treat everybody with respect and just help when we can, and make the world a better place. I've just a couple months ago, I went to the Wawa on my lunch break, and there was a guy sitting out on the table. He stopped me. Normally, I just kind of walk by homeless people because I'm in kind of a hurry, or a lot of times they'll ask for money. I don't want to give them money because sometimes they'll turn it into alcohol or their drugs. I don't want to fuel that. I don't want to support that. But this guy, he stopped me at the table. He's like, "Hey man," he had a backpack with him. He's like, "Hey man, I'm hungry. My friend, he just went with some girl to do who knows what, if it was drugs or make some money or do whatever he needed to do. And he's like, I'm hungry. I don't have anywhere to go. Would you mind buying me some food?" I said, "Yeah, come on in. I'll get you some food." So he came in and he got a drink. He got a sub. He got a snack. I mean, he loaded up, but I just let him go because I don't know what he's been through. I don't know his life. I just wanted to make somebody's day and make his life a little bit easier. And I felt really good about that. And I think if everybody had that mindset, we would be in a lot better place. We really would.
It does feel good. It does feel good to give. I was kind of like one of those people, like arrogant when it came to homeless people when I was in Florida. So at first, when I first got down there, obviously, like when you go to the gas stations, there are certain gas stations that
Right.
It seems like all the homeless people just like hang out at.
Absolutely.
So I would at first I would give homeless people money. But it got to a point where I didn't really have money to give. So I was like, just stop asking me. Just stop asking me. It's annoying. And I almost actually got stabbed by a homeless person one time because I told them no. I was at a gas station right near the school. And I was just like, I was already in a bad mood. I probably did come off as arrogant, but I was like, no, dude, just leave me alone. And like, it got into this crazy thing where he almost stabbed me. It's crazy in Florida, people. Let me tell you, it gets crazy in Florida.
I mean, it's funny because you can literally see some of the craziest headlines, and you can almost guess 9 times out of 10 it's always Florida.
Always, it's crazy.
But
yeah, that I was kind of like that. But then, when I actually became homeless, obviously my attitude changed. So I went from being the arrogant guy about homeless people to an actual homeless person. So that was kind of ironic and funny, I guess.
yeah, it's kind of an eye opener, but at the same time, I try not to judge, and I've really learned that being here in Florida because I come from a very small town up in the Midwest. So there's a lot of closed-mindedness, and I've never been a closed-minded person. I always try to keep an open mind with everything because when you close your mind, you're not open to other suggestions and learning new things. So I always try to keep an open mind with everything. I always take things with a grain of salt. I don't like to for people to say, "Oh yeah, this isn't going to work." I'm like, it looks like it's not going to work, but let me try and actually figure it out. Like, I have to try it for myself to make sure that it doesn't work. And a lot of my friends and family can even attest to that. Like, yeah, he has to try things for himself, for him to actually like, okay, yeah, you're right. That doesn't work. I never like to take things at face value. I always like to question things, but I think a lot of people need to do that because we don't have a lot of intellectual stuff going on today.
Especially in today's age with the, just how much propaganda and fake articles that are online. This is obviously not like what we're talking about, but there's just, like you said, you got to like really question things sometimes. And, there's some people that will just believe whatever they hear or whatever the case might be. I'm the same way. I question everything to the point where I sound like a conspiracy theorist. So I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, I completely do as well. And I think that's a good thing. But sometimes it's like, sometimes I overthink it. And it's like, that's really doesn't need to be thought like that. But I thought about it anyways. So, yeah. So going back a little bit about your situation, I know you learned a lot from it, but what are some other things that really kind of drove home and made you realize like this was a good thing for me, and now because of it, I'm on the right path?
Yeah. So obviously, like when you hit rock bottom, your motivation level becomes like infinite because you'll do, the fight or flight system kind of kicks in, and you'll basically do whatever you can to make money or make your situation better. So, becoming homeless, my production, I feel like, I just had that extra motivation to like, and inspiration to like, just really just grind it out. Not that I wasn't already grinding it out before, but you know what I mean? Like when you hit rock bottom, like there's a certain spark that just goes off in you and that fire really lights. So I was really on like my marketing game, like just like going on Facebook and Instagram and searching up hashtags like Orlando rappers or Orlando artists and literally going through all the people on those hashtags and messaging them and just trying to get clients, anyone. I would try to get people to buy a beat from me, or, I would try to record them. Because I have a mobile setup, so I have my laptop and all my mics, so I can still record people mobilely. I can drive to you and everything. So I did that a few times. I got clients to mix and master their songs just from doing that, like just Facebook and Instagram. So I actually ended up learning like kind of marketing tactics from, that whole period of struggle that I probably wouldn't have, even thought of when I was, not homeless. So just kind of like learning more about, different ways and different approaches to get leads and customers. That was actually a really big thing for me. Other than that, it's more or less not like music lessons, but like life lessons that I learned from that, like, how to budget a little bit better. I really learned how to make $1 stretch when I was homeless. Just buying ramen noodles and just trying to get the most value as I could from $1 bill. And then other than that, just like, treating people a little more kindly, as far as like, homeless people, I mean, and just my whole attitude in general. After the initial like emotional breakdown I had when it first all started happening, I kind of calmed down a little bit. I, kind of really thought things through and realized, even though, I'm homeless, it's really not that bad. Like, I have my car. Like, there's people out there that are literally homeless that don't even have a car. Like, they're sleeping on benches. I at least might have my car. Like, I was spoiled, honestly. And actually funny now, I'm remembering, I was at a gas station one night and some homeless guy said that to me. Like, he came up to me asking me for money. I was like, hey, man, I'm homeless too. He's like, how are you homeless? You got a car? I was like, this is what I live in. He's like, man, you're lucky, because I would kill to have a car to sleep in every night. Like, you got warmth. You don't got to worry about rain. I was like, damn, yeah, you're right, man. You're right. I am pretty lucky. And then that same guy, actually, I ended up giving my winter coat to, because I had it in my back seat. And he saw it. And he was like, dude, that's a really nice coat. Do you need that? I was like, I don't really need it, man. You can have it. It's like the middle of summer. It's the winter coat I had from when I was living up north. So I gave it to him, and it, I felt really good and everything. So just stuff like that.
Thanks for sharing. I don't really have a whole lot else for you, because you talked about everything in your story there. You answered that whole question and more in the last answer you gave. So thanks again for that. We covered so much ground. We talked a lot about production. We talked about mixing, the mastering, freelancing. We talked about your story and kind of keeping your head up. And because once you hit rock bottom, there's nowhere to go but up. And I think that's important for me. I've hit that rock bottom. I haven't hit your rock bottom, but my rock bottom.
Everyone has a different rock bottom.
Exactly.
Everyone's rock bottom is different.
Exactly. And we all get those dark moments. It's kind of like a sine wave. You have your highs and you have your lows, and we all, yeah, it really is. For those that don't know what a sine wave is, I'm not going to explain it. You just have to Google it.
Roller coaster. Just look at a roller.
Yeah, roller coaster, up and down, and we all have those sine moments. And we have our highs and our lows. So I just want to say thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate everything you've contributed to production and your story and everything. And I'm sure the guests will appreciate everything as well. How can the guests follow up with you and ask any questions, or how can they keep in contact with you and see the work you're working on?
For sure, yeah. I mean, I'm on basically every social media platform except for like Snapchat. You can find me at Count Morris, COUNTMORRIS. That's pretty much my social media handle for everything. YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. I'm mostly active on Instagram and Facebook. So those are probably going to be the best spots. But you can also check out my website. It's just countmorrismusic.com. I have all my beats on there. I'm currently working on a second website where I can kind of showcase like my mixing and kind of everything I do. But those are going to be the best spots. The at countmorrismusic.com, and then Count Morris for all the social media platforms. And you can feel free to reach out to me whenever about anything. Would love to talk to you guys. Any questions you have, I would love to answer it. Or even if you guys want to work, if you have projects that you want mixed and mastered, or if you're looking for some hip hop instrumentals and R&B instrumentals, then definitely hit me up for that, and we can talk it out.
Cool.
But thank you a lot, Lennon. This is a lot of fun. I really appreciate you having me on. I know I was a little bit delayed on your response to coming on the show.
No
I kind of
worries.
got busy with life, but I'm definitely I'm glad I was able to come, and I really appreciate you letting me be a guest.
Yeah,
and I really hope that you excel and this podcast really blows up.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll put all of your links that you had mentioned in the show notes below, so it's easier for everybody to kind of click and just kind of go. So yeah, thanks again one last time for being on the show, taking the time out of your busy schedule to sit down and have a chat with me. We had a really good organic conversation, and I really enjoyed that. So thanks again.
No, thank you, Lennon. And hopefully we can do this again sometime.
And boom goes the dynamite. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Mr. Anthony. I really enjoyed talking about kind of production and mixing and mastering and all that fun jazz, because I really enjoy talking about that stuff, and I definitely want to talk more about it in future episodes. And I do have some ideas and some pretty amazing guests, including some multi-Grammy winning mix mastering engineers. So stay tuned for those episodes, because we'll really dissect some mixing and mastering techniques in those episodes. But I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Mr. Anthony. He is incredibly inspiring, and I really loved his story about how he kind of grew up, and he would look up techniques and learn mixing and mastering and music production at his other job, and then going to school for it, and then ultimately graduating. In 5 to 6 months before graduating, he was homeless, and how he kind of turned that into a positive situation and keeps his head up and keeps going strong. So I hope you enjoyed my conversation, and I just want to remind you to sign up for my mailing list, as it helps me notify you when episodes like this are live, as well as some music industry tips and tricks. There's also a link to my Patreon account, which helps me grow the show and raise money for the show, as well as potentially even working with some of you if you're interested in working with me. There's also a link to the guest request form. So if you or somebody you know would be a good guest for the show, I would encourage you to please fill out that form, and I will get into contact with you if you're a good fit for the show. I'm always looking for the next up-and-coming music industry executive, music producer, engineer, touring manager, artist manager, lawyer, you name it. And lastly, I would appreciate it if you would provide me with a 5-star rating and or review in Apple Podcasts or whichever podcasting platform that you use to listen to your podcasts on. Any rating or review in those systems would greatly help me, as it helps the shoe. You don't wear the show, you listen to it. So if you could please leave a rating or review in Apple Podcasts, it helps the show get discovered by new listeners and help us grow kind of a bigger community. So thanks again for listening and tuning into this week's episode of When Life Hands You Lemons. I can't thank you enough for all of your support, and we will see you next week on When Life Hands You Lemons.